I don't know what time we're going to end, but I know what time we're going to start. We're going to start at 5 o'clock because that's what the flyer said. I am Erin Deniston, and what you're going to hear today is about 3D modeling and 3D printing. To just let you know where I am with this and how I got here. I started teaching when I was in second grade. I had a daycare that I convinced neighborhood moms to let me have their kids for 25 cents a day, and I taught them. That was back in the day where it was okay to take a group of pre-K students to the library on the streets with no adults at all. I started teaching in the science education world in the early 90s. I was one of the first teachers that I ever met that taught what at that time was called design technology, what we now call children's engineering, and then what eventually morphed into STEM. So I've been a STEM educator since the early 90s. I did a pretty good job. I've got 2 kids. One of my kids is a mechanical engineer and an innovation consultant, a job that didn't exist when I was in school. My other kid is a computer scientist. So the geek doesn't fall far from the tree. So we've been bathing in this stuff for a long, long time. We got our first computer in the mid-'80s. We got the first one of the desktop printers that came out. So we've been early adopters all of my adult life. My last job was as the district STEM facilitator in Orange County schools. I was there for about 10 years. I taught in Chatham County also as a curriculum coach. I've taught in Chapel Hill, Scarborough City Schools as a science specialist, and started teaching in North Carolina when we moved here as a science resource specialist in Durham Public Schools. So I've got a lot of experience with a lot of STEM. And I first ran into 3D printers when my oldest son went to engineering school up in Boston. And he had an internship at an engineering firm, and part of his job was to use SolidWorks to create objects that then they would print. At that time, they had a 3D printer at this company. It was $40,000. These were not meant for hobbyists. Both my sons, though, were already familiar with SolidWorks because I'm pretty sure the computer scientist kid hacked into a website and stole a copy of SolidWorks. We don't talk about it. But that's how they learned SolidWorks. They introduced me to 3D modeling, and they introduced me to 3D printing. When I was in Chatham County schools, I started after-school clubs doing 3D modeling and coding and computer science. Parents, I'll bet you didn't, or grandparents, bet you did not know that North Carolina has standards for computer science. They start in kindergarten. You probably haven't heard of it because they're not teaching it. So and they're not teaching it because reading and math have sucked all the oxygen out of the room. I'm bitter, just a little bitter. But part of those standards are looking at things like additive manufacturing, coding, those kinds of things. So schools are trying, but without somebody that's invested, interested, and willing to push, it's a hard sell. I started in Orange County schools in early 20-teens, something like that. And by the time I left, every elementary school had a makerspace. Every elementary school had 2 3D printers. Every middle school had 2 3D printers. And both the science and the math departments at every high school had their own dedicated 3D printers. What teachers do with them after I left, I don't know. But it's doable. These aren't expensive anymore. So hopefully what you're going to get out of tonight is some personal education, but I'm also asking you to go out and advocate for public schools to push this kinds of thing. I hope at the end of this you'll understand why I think this is important and why I think this is worthwhile for our kids to know. I'm primarily an educator, This is my passion. I think it's critically important, so I think you're going to get that. This is Bernie, who is part of Innovate Chatham.
Hi.
And that's the group that is sponsoring this talk tonight. Did you want?
We can hear you. Your voice is hitting the back, but it's also in the back with a whole bunch of echoes.
Okay.
So, what do you think? Think you can do that?
Yes, I think I can do that.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, nope.
Not too close to
There we
the
go.
speaker.
Don't freak me
It's
out.
going to be my ears.
Anybody has a hearing aid in?
There we go.
Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is, much better, okay. Let me recap. I'm passionate about this stuff. I think this is important. I want you to take this message to the schools that you engage with, hopefully as citizens, parents, or grandparents. Kidlets, you guys need to ask, okay? All of this is free. All right. I'm assuming there's a wide variety of knowledge about 3D printing. I've got two videos. One I'm going to show you that is absolutely the absolute basics of 3D printing, what it is. So let's look at that.
Printing. For years, we've used it to make books, newspapers, packaging, and so much more. But more recently, you might have heard the term 3D printing thrown around. It allows you to take a digital model and turn it into a tangible, three-dimensional object like a picnic bank. Let's take a look at how it works in 3 basic steps. Step 1. It starts with a virtual design. Someone uses computer-aided design, or CAD software, to create a kind of precise drawing of what they'd like to create. This acts as a blueprint for the 3D printer to read. Step 2. The digital model is broken down into hundreds or even thousands of thin horizontal layers with a process called slicing. Step 3. All of these layers are sent to the 3D printer. There are many different types of 3D printers, but most have a nozzle that ejects a semi-liquid material, usually plastic, to print each of these layers. The nozzle moves around, printing layer upon layer upon layer upon layer, following the digital model. Depending on the printer and the complexity of the design, this can take anywhere from a few hours to several days. And just like that, you've got a 3D printed object. 3D printing has given engineers, designers, and just everyday people the ability to create complex objects that they previously weren't able to. Doctors are using 3D printing to make prosthetics, and some companies have been using larger scale printers to create buildings and cars. As the technology continues to get more precise, faster, and cheaper, its applications will only continue to grow.
Okay. So in its simplest form, that's it. It's taking something that's solid, turning it into a liquid or a semi-liquid, and then as it hardens, it becomes the object that you want. It was first proposed in science fiction, a science fiction novel that was published in 1947. It didn't really get started until about the 70s because there's an enormous number of technical challenges that had to be overcome before the first 3D printer was developed. It really began to take off in the 80s and the 90s, and by the 2000s, it's everywhere. The reason why I'm so passionate about this and other areas of STEM education is this. When we talk about STEM jobs for kids, when we talk about getting them ready, we're not talking about marine biology. We're full. We have enough. There are a lot of marine biologists driving Ubers. What we need are computer scientists and engineers. And in the computer science world, there are all of these subdomains, and that's where the emphasis in growing STEM professionals needs to be, in these two things. 3D modeling, 3D printing is a pretty good overlap of those two big chunks of where the job growth is going to be over the next many years. This is the other reason I'm passionate. I'm a female. I, unfortunately, did not have daughters. But this crushes my soul. Women are underrepresented in almost all STEM careers with one weird carve-out, and that is chemical engineering. Who knew? But these are all high-paying jobs, and they're not being occupied by women. This is important because these people are tasked with solving problems. And people solve problems that are interesting to them and important to them. They will gravitate towards things that have meaning. If you don't have women in these jobs, the problems that are most important to women are not going to be addressed. There's no animus in that, it's just the way it is. My favorite example is drones. When drones were first getting started and people were trying to think of what can we do with these drones, I can't tell you how many times I saw beer and pizza deliveries during sports game as an example of a use of drones. I don't care about pizza and beer at football games. I might care more about what I could do with drone delivery, say in an emergency situation or in an environmental disaster. It isn't to say one is better than the other. It's what problem do we want to solve? So encouraging women, and that starts in elementary school. If you wait until middle school, it is too late. Most girls make a decision about going into the STEM world by the end of 5th grade. I'm looking at you. Okay? There are some women that do decide at a later state, but for the most part, it's a truism. By 4th or 5th grade, most elementary school girls will have made some decisions. And unfortunately, making that decision that young means you have closed doors that you don't realize were open until then. They stop taking the math courses. They stop seeing themselves as being able to do these STEM careers. So it's important to me, again, that we take all of this into consideration. So also, okay, here's another sad women's story. See that 10% of electrical, computer, or hardware engineers? This is particularly tragic. Computer science and computer engineering came out of the electrical engineering world in the 50s. In the 50s, half of the people who were the early computer scientists and engineers were women. And that's where we are now. There's a variety of reasons for that. When I first moved to Chapel Hill in 1997, I talked to somebody at UNC in their Department of Computer Science, and they said almost gleefully they had never graduated a female PhD student. It's not that they didn't go into it, they just didn't stay. And this guy thought it was kind of funny. So this is what we're fighting against. All right. Here's the other reason, and this is a very long video. I encourage you to watch all of it. I'm going to pick out a few pieces that I think are really indicative of the power of 3D modeling and 3D printing. We're going to watch those, and then we're going to get started with the actual teaching. So let me run this. I have to find the right times with this, so I'm going to go to the video.
Turns you from being a passive consumer to an active creator.
3D printing is this amazing new technology where you can take a 3D digital file and with the click of a button, use that file to create an actual physical 3D part. So how does a 3D printer work? The first step is to get a 3D file, and you can get your 3D file in one of two ways. One, you can simply download the file from the internet. The second way is you can design your own 3D part. The software is going to slice your part into layers. By building apart layer by layer, you're going to create a plastic part in 3 dimensions, and the possibilities are limited only by your imagination. People will create their next big invention, or engineers and designers create small fraction runs or little prototypes. Teachers can use it to print out teaching aids. If the teacher's doing a little lesson on a ship, they can actually print out a sailing ship and pass around the class. And you can print out things for around the house. iPhone cases are pretty big. You break a towel up, you can print out a new one. We want to make 3D printers at a price that the average person can afford and also easy to use. We're already seeing late stage early adoption of 3D printing, but for me, the exciting thing is what's to come.
Is an online 3D printing community and marketplace. Anyone in the world can upload a 3D model and print it for you. And then also, if you decide you want to make it for sale, you can sell it and we'll produce it on demand for the customer wherever they are in the world. You can essentially bring a product to market with no risk. You don't have inventory anymore. You don't have to make sure that there's a market ready for your product. If you sell one, that's awesome. If you sell 10,000, then all of a sudden you have passive income. And that rapidly changes the economy. Usually to bring a product to market, it takes a year, and then you have to find the manufacturer and the investor. And so it's going to force us to change how we think about not only buying products, but hiring one of our colleagues for his roller. And what it costs him something like $250 to get that part in mail from the solar company, and he literally just 3D printed the solar part and got it for $20. You have this explosive technology where everything is made just for you, but at the price and quality tends to be buying in the store. This could be a scary technology for some companies, because what does that mean for seasons now? You have infinite inventory, and what does it mean for scarcity, which is one of the core tenets of so many industries. I think it's very similar to social media or other tools of engagement where you're afraid to see what that would mean when consumers go to date with you, or to really rethink your traditional manufacturing process, which has become so many middlemen. I think we just have to stop thinking that you need to reach 100,000 million people for something to be successful. Customization is really changing the way that people think about design and production as well.
Okay. There's another part, I think the next part is on copyright, which we're not...
The other thing, hopefully, is that the industries that are disrupted by 3D printing have the model of the music industry to maybe learn from. The music industry, when someone started copying things, decided the best thing to do was take their time and their money and invest it in suing everyone they could find, trying to stop the progress of technology. That didn't work very well. And so the hope is that these creators, when they see this new technology, they capture some of the upside and they say, oh, okay, this can change my business for the better. And they do that. It's a hard thing to do, but the music industry decides that maybe the thing they have to do.
3D printing can have a profound impact on all of us, whether you consider yourself a designer or not. In the future, there are going to be 3D printers that will allow you to actually create three-dimensional structures of living cells. And they can build very complex structures like blood vessels or skin tissue. And the idea there is that in 10 or 20 years, these scientists are going to be able to 3D print tissue that can replace damaged vessels in the heart, or they're going to be able to print replacement organs. So you won't have to go to find an organ donor anymore. You're just going to have them 3D printed in hospital based on your own cells and your own genetics. Right now at MIT, scientists are working on 3D printers that actually allow you to print food. You wouldn't want that, right? You can just ask Siri to cook you a steak, and it's really going to be an exciting time to come. In Japan, there's a company that's taking sonography. So they scan up their woman's belly, and they're able to actually 3D print a picture of her torso. So instead of just having a puzzle black and white picture, you're getting a real model of what your child is going to look like. People are using 3D printers to do all sorts of interesting things in terms of the environment. Researchers are using 3D printers that can print concrete to make replacements for parts of the Great Barrier Reef that they damaged. Normally, those reefs take thousands of years to build. What these scientists do is they find areas that are damaged, they make CAD replicas of those damaged areas, and they print them in concrete. So it's a base structure on which coral will create a top layer, and that helps reinvigorate the environment and helps return normality to that area. I mean, one of the coolest things about 3D printing is that it's a community that never stops innovating. There are hundreds of innovators who are making little tweaks to these products or trying out different things, and so it really gives everybody an opportunity to create anything they can imagine.
3D printing is the next wave of how brands and consumers can engage, and now we're just starting to see that happen.
So I think there's time where it'll be a little more difficult to use to understand the camera.
The way to protect creators and designers is to make sure to give people a way to spend money on 3D printed things in the future.
Okay, there's a lot more in that video. It's from PBS. It's a couple of years old, that idea of the MIT's printing food, that's a reality now. You can buy them. They sound disgusting. And they are working on some other kinds of food products. So that is not, that's there. Okay, let's go. So there's all kinds of things that are being 3D printed now. Every single material that they can use for 3D printing poses its own technical challenges. One of the biggest challenges was glass, which actually surprised me because glass can be melted, glass can solidify, but evidently it was a really tricky challenge. MIT cracked that one about 10 or 15 years ago, and there are now commercial 3D glass printers. Cars, mostly the chassis, not the innards. That we aren't there yet. There are lots and lots of 3D printed houses now. There's an entire neighborhood of affordable housing that was printed in Mexico about 4 or 5 years ago. Now, it's just the shell. You still got to go in and put your toilets and your lights and all that stuff. But the outside of it is out of concrete, and you can build a house, print a house, small one, in a matter of days. You're not waiting for weeks, and you're not using wood products to do that kind of printing. What you see in the corner there is kind of a 3D printed fabric. It's more akin to a chainmail, although it's very, very light, but because it's interlinked, and that is 3D modeled, my skills are not there. They're making clothing out of it. They're making shoes out of it, and I'm a huge high heel fan. I've never yet seen a really cute pair of 3D printed heels. Prosthetics are huge. And one of the reasons they're so big, it's such a big industry, is a lot of children get prosthetics due to birth injuries, times of war, or disease. And the problem with kids is they will grow. And if you have to go back every year to get a prosthetic remade to fit that larger limb, it really adds up for parents. Well, with 3D printing, you make one file. You design it essentially one time. You tweak it as the kid gets older. You change the length, the dimensions. There is one model who was born without her forearm, and she's a big 3D printing fan, so she's got a whole wardrobe of 3D printed arms. And so when she's working, she's got one arm that has an articulated hand. When she's all dressed up, like she goes to a lot of events, she's got this really snazzy, gold-looking prosthetic arm. So she's able to do that because the cost is so much lower and the ease is so much greater. So prosthetics are a huge industry, not just with people, but lots and lots of animals get prosthetics too. If you look up prosthetics for zoo animals or in animal rehab, there are turtles with 3D printed shells. There is an elephant or several with 3D printed hooves because their legs are blown off on old mines. This is the holy grail. This is where everybody wants to get, and that is organs that are 3D printed, that you will not have the risk of rejection. It'll be your cells, so it'll be automatic. They can 3D print things to go on, or they can 3D print essentially a shell that they can then cover with skin grafts for things like ears or nose or things like that. They're not there with organs yet. If you think glass was a technical challenge, dealing with living material is I expect to be dead before that actually happens. But that's where they're going. And it's being used in all kinds of industries. This is the 3D modeling part rather than the 3D printing. This is in the military. They, in fact, do have a 3D printer. But modeling things in the military is a huge business that is modeling living organs. There's my favorite game, Skyrim. That's all 3D modeled. And then they use a game design engine called Unreal. And then this is this giant 3D printer that they forgotten the industry that's on there. They have a 3D printer on the International Space Station because if something breaks, you're not going to Lowe's. You need to be able to print something in space. I am baffled as how the gravity part works because the filament comes down. I don't know how that works. It's fascinating. It must have been a technical challenge in and of itself. So that's the why and the what. Before we move any further, do you have any questions about 3D modeling or 3D printing in the broader context? Yes, sir.
Just comment, I have a 3D printed crown model.
Yeah. I have a 3D printer at home. You can buy them now at Walmart for $300.
You buy it on eBay for 99.
Yeah, you got to be really, really careful. There are really bad printers out there, and there are 3D printer kits that sound like a deal, and they're not.
I bought a Reality at 3 weeks ago.
Okay, well, good luck. Anything else? Any questions about 3D printing or modeling? So here's my 3D printing story. My husband, who's a very good cook, an educated person, we have a casserole thing with a lid, and the lid had a plastic handle on it. I don't know what he was thinking. But he took the casserole and he put it in the oven at 450, 475. It was hot, and it melted the knob. So here are my choices. I can buy a new lid. That was ungodly expensive. I could buy somebody else's replacement lid, and I went on Shapeways and found one. And somebody else had already modeled it, put it on Shapeways or Thingiverse or somewhere, and I could print that, have them print it and send it to me. Or, because I had a 3D printer, I went on to Thingiverse, somebody had modeled it, I downloaded the file and sent it to my 3D printer, and I had a replacement. Looks terrible, but it's a reminder to my husband every time to lower the temperature. So there's going to be lots of other ways that 3D printing can be used in a home, but first, you got to learn how to 3D model. So what we're going to do for the bulk of the time is we're going to learn how to do this 3D modeling. What I want you to do is close your devices. I am a professional teacher. Kids who have their devices open are not paying attention to me. And I don't think adults are any better. So TinkerCAD is a program I first ran into 15 years ago when I was doing an after-school club at Perry Harrison. Originally, TinkerCAD was like somebody's vanity program. It was eventually bought up by Autodesk. Autodesk is a huge player in the 3D modeling world. Their products, there's a bunch of them, they have a ton of them, but their original products for a school, each license, when my kids were in an architecture and engineering class in high school, each license for each desktop was over $2,000. They got a lot of money. And people are buying their products even today. This is still free. The reason it's free is because Autodesk has identified that lag, that they don't have enough people going into these programs to learn these skills. And if you come into 3D modeling as an engineering student at the college level, it is a huge lift. And it's responsible for a lot of kids just saying, no, I'm sorry, I just can't. So TinkerCAD is an incredibly powerful, very friendly, low bar to entry program. And again, did I mention it's free? So schools all over the world use TinkerCAD, and in fact, TinkerCAD is what runs the 3D print, or is what is used in the makerspaces on UNC Chapel Hill's campus. TinkerCAD is also what's used there's lots of universities now have this intro to computer science for non-computer science majors, and they use Scratch as a programming language, and then they will also use TinkerCAD as an entry level to 3D modeling. So that's why we use TinkerCAD. And I'm going to close this up again. This is going to be challenging to do this. And now we're going to go to, I'm going to show you TinkerCAD. And let's see, I just want to make this bigger. This is a huge program. They keep adding things. They're also very responsive to teachers over the years, me and my colleagues. I and my colleagues. Yeah, not an ELA teacher. We've emailed them or asked for things like they used to make it very challenging for kids to sign up for as a user. They used to, I again saw one thing they haven't changed, and I'll show it to you later. But they've been very responsive to teachers, so this is an incredibly great tool for teachers, and it's easy to learn how to use, and it will take forever to learn to master, which I think is the highlight of, or the hallmark of a good, where is my, okay. I'm going to delete this stuff because I was just messing around with this yesterday. Oops. Okay. So in TinkerCAD, there is, hold on, I need a mouse to do this. I know my kids, my students don't need mouse, but they're much more comfortable with a trackpad than I am. So let me get this set up. Yeah, hold that for a second. Chat around. There we go. Okay. Oh, it should be good. There it is. All right, now I can do it. Okay, thanks. All right, so what to know about 3D modeling? Every single complex object is really just a collection of basic shapes. So if you think about it, if you were designing a person in 3D, you would look at the shapes of that body. So your head is kind of an oval, an egg shape. And your torso is essentially a rectangle. Arms, legs, those are columns. Your fingers are little columns. I don't know what you would do with the pad of your hand, maybe another little circle. It's just basic shapes put together to make a more complex shape. As you learn how to 3D model, you get better and better and better at looking at complex objects and disaggregating, pulling them apart so that you can see the simpler primitive shapes that make that up. So that's how to approach 3D modeling, is how can you emulate those simple shapes and put them together as a whole. So this is the model, this is the work plane. This blue work plane in TinkerCAD represents what's called the build plate in a 3D printer. So everything, if you're modeling to print, you need to pay attention to this. If you're not modeling to print, if you're modeling for some other reason, and believe me, just like word processing, 99% of what you use your word processor for, you don't print anymore. It exists somewhere else for some other reason. 3D modeling is the same way. So unless you are modeling something to send to a printer, you don't have to worry about the work plane. Everything can exist and not necessarily connect. If, however, you are planning to print anything, you have to pay attention to that. If it is not connected to the base, to the build plate of a 3D printer, and everything connects back to that base, your printer just stops. I tell kids that 3D printers are precision machines, they're expensive machines, and they're stupid machines because they can't guess that you wanted this thing floating in air connected to this thing down on the base. The print will go until it reaches an empty space, and then it just stops. So that's the work plane. There is only one blue work plane in TinkerCAD, but there are other work planes that you can use. This is a little, the little dice thing lets you see the work plane from all different directions, but you can do that with your mouse as well. There are some buttons over, I'm sorry, these are so hard for you to see. This is the home button that will always take you back to this screen. Very helpful because as you get complex design, you start to forget where things are. So going home will kind of snap it to this view. You can increase zoom in, but you can also do that with your mouse. You can zoom out, and then you can also see it in 2D as a flat image, and this is helpful at certain points in your build. So let's go home and snap out of that. Over here, these things over here are called primitives or basic shapes. TinkerCAD has a lot more than basic shapes. Let me see. They have all these different options. Here's the deal when you're learning how to 3D model. Don't use any of them. Unless you can tell me how it was modeled, these more complex shapes, like that little penguin there. That's not a hard thing to model. It's a pretty easy thing to model. But unless you can tell me how that's modeled, don't use it. Because using these doesn't teach you a thing about how to 3D model. It just tells you that you can use other people's work. So when I'm teaching kids, I don't allow them to use any of those. I encourage you to just, as a rule, while you're learning how to model, is to follow that. If you just want something to bring in for another reason, you want something to print, it's too complex, like anything that's threaded, I can't do it. Then you can find it somewhere else. But for your education, don't use these. What you're going to, they've got this new cool thing, SimLab. So cool. I wish I had a class to teach right now. This is where you can actually, it has a physics engine. So if you have a ball, a round shape, and you have it at the top, and you want it to drop down, you can simulate it so that it drops or hits things, and they behave according to the laws of physics. I was playing with it today. It was pretty cool. All right, these are the basic shapes. So what we're going to do, and I have to sit here to do this because I need to be able to use my mouse, we are going to build a house. So when you think about a house, what's the basic primitive shape that you would use to make a house, a drawing of a house? What? Cube. A cube. And look what we have right here. We have a cube. So you bring your cube over to the build plate, and it's got all these different things here. Again, this is a very powerful program. I am showing you the absolute top gloss of what you can do. There are measurements in there. There's degrees. You can rotate things. You can do a ton with this. But for us right now, we're just going to make this a little bigger. In computer science and in engineering, the goal is to be as lazy as possible. If there's an easy way to do that, that's what you want to do. Sometimes it takes years of work to be lazy, but that's the goal. So in TinkerCAD, there is always at least 2 ways to do anything that you want to do. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to make this bigger. And see these little dots here? You just click and drag and make them as big or as wide as you want to. That looks too big to me, so I'm going to reduce this, pull it down a little. That's not big enough. I'm going to move my work plane around to see if I like the shape. And no, I don't know what I did with that, but I don't like that at all. So we're going to delete it and start over. So you bring the shapes in, and they will click to whatever is the uppermost work plane. So if you have a second work plane in there, it'll click to that second work plane. So let's make this big, and all right, like that. Over here are all these different characteristics of that object, and you can change those. You can change the color, change the size, change the radiuses. There's lots of different things you can do, but for right now we're going to stick with a cube because that's our basic house. Take a notice of this. This is, whenever you see those gray and white stripes, diagonal stripes, that means something is transparent or see-through. That's like a standard. If you're looking for graphics, you'll notice the same thing. So we can turn this into, essentially it's an empty. It's a not there. This is very important later, but I just wanted to show you that. And you can change the color if you want. So we're going to make a greenhouse. Okay, there we go. All right, what's next for our house?
Roof.
What shape?
Triangular prism.
A triangular prism. Now, you don't have to make a triangular prism. It just so happens we have one. But if I didn't want a triangular prism, I wanted to something a little bit more creative, 3D modeling should be creative. This can also be an art form. So especially if you're just playing around, you can be as creative as you like. I personally am not terribly creative, so we're going to go with a triangular prism. I'm going to put, because I want to bring this in, ooh, that one's, I want these different colors, so we're going to go back to red for the house. When I bring in the roof, it comes in again attached to that primary work plane. Now, they have added some functionality with these work planes that I think can be a little confusing as a beginning modeler. So I'm going to show you two ways to do the same thing. TinkerCAD now has alternative ways that look like they're going to streamline your work a little bit, but you should learn the original basics because then the next step will make more sense. If I want this roof on top of my house, I can pick it up with this black arrow. Now you see there's a shadow underneath of that. It means it's floating in midair. And I can move it over to my house and hope it's in the right place, and it is not. So I could try lowering it. Oh, well, now I've lowered it too far, and that looks peculiar. You can see you can blend the shapes together. This is where you start seeing that more complex shape. I could fuss around with this, but again, I'm lazy, and there's an easier way to do this. So I'm going to, whoa, no, that's not what I'm going to do. Whoop, there we go. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to bring in a second work plane and put it on top. And it's yellow, that means it's the secondary work plane. This is all a kind of imaginary work plane. The blue one does represent something real. Now when I bring in my roof, it sticks right where I wanted it. I still have to play around with this thing though to make it the size that I want. So I'm going to pull out the corners and I'm going to rotate around, and that looks too short to me, so I'm going to make it a little higher. It's kind of sloppy. I can see there's a roof overhang. I could fix that. Okay, that looks, oh, I've done better. But that's our basic house, roof and house. So I'm going to get rid of that other work plane by going click, click. What else do I need?
Doors.
We need a door. When you say door, you're actually just talking about an empty. It's a doorway that you need, and a door is what opens and closes. But what you first need is the empty. You need a hole in your house to be a door or a window. So let's make a door. I'm sorry, that is just bad. I gotta fix that. That's just, every OCD bone in my body is quivering. Okay, that's still bad, but we're okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to either bring in this shape, which is again an empty, or if you want to be creative with your door, we can bring in, let's bring in this kind of door. And we're going to put it there, and notice I can push it into. So I've got these two objects melded. It's still not a hole though, so I'm going to turn it into one by clicking this. Now, that's an opening. I've done enough modeling so I know what the effect is going to be, but you probably don't. So what you do to see what everything looks like, or what it would look like if it was printed, a couple of ways you can do this. You can do Command A or Control A to select all, or you can just draw a box around it. And then up here is a group symbol, and now you can see everything is the same color. That tells you that it's grouped, and you can see my door. I've got this kind of clever little curved doorway in there. So that's my door. Lots of different ways to do the same thing. Also notice it's all the same color. Here's why. 3D printers print in one color. You can change the spools, But whatever the spool is going to be what color your object is. If, again, you are printing, you need to know what it's going to look like in that color. If you are not printing, if this is for some other reason, then the sky's the limit as far as the colors are concerned. You can make them any color that you like. But for printing, no, it's going to be a single color. There is a beta version. I believe it's on the market now. I've not seen it, but I haven't heard any use reports about it. There is one now out on the market that prints in 4 colors. They are not cheap. And the modeling challenge is going to be huge because trying to figure out where those different colors are is going to be quite a challenge. I feel like our house is not done yet. What does a little house need? Let's assume I put some windows in there. What else could a house need? Cozy, winter, a fireplace. We'd have to be inside. Who did what say? A chimney. Let's do a chimney. Okay. So again, there are multiple ways to do this. I could put a work plane on the side of my house and bring in, let's do a circular chimney and bring it in, but that doesn't look right.
That's going to be hard to build out.
Not to mention its complete lack of functionality. In this case, doing it the other way, what in the other case was harder, lifting it up and pushing it in is actually easier. So now I could fix this. There's a little dial up here that allows you to rotate things. But again, lazy, lazy, lazy. So we're just going to delete that. We're going to delete that work plane. And we're going to bring in this time, we're going to bring it over to here. And I'm going to lift it up. I think I'm going to make it a little smaller. This is not a factory. Lift it up a little more. And then I'm going to push it into the roof of the house. And now I've got a chimney. That's basically what 3D modeling is. It's adding and subtracting basic shapes and holes to create a complex object.